very routine. Honestly, it's a very routine thing. It's not a big deal. You people are making that a big deal, the business, because, hey, look, number one, when I won, they all knew I had a big business all over the place.
Good morning and welcome back to AM Joy. I'm Jonathan Capehart, filling in for Joy Reid. Concerns over Donald Trump's potential conflicts of interest are growing by the day, but according to the president-elect, it's not a big deal. The media and American public remain in the dark about the extent of Trump's financial entanglements across the globe. We've never seen his tax returns. And Trump canceled a December press conference meant to address this very issue, saying now that a presser is scheduled, quote, sometime in January. Trump has not held a true press conference since July, and no, tweets and brief impromptu question and answer sessions outside his Mar-a-Lago resort don't count. This lack of information comes with mixed messaging from Trump and his team and outright lies from the president-elect. For example, millions of people voted illegally for his opponent. And it means the media must be vigilant about covering the incoming Trump administration with accuracy, context, and tireless questioning. So, how do we in the media rise to the occasion? Back with me are Jamil Smith of MTV News, Juan Manuel Benitez, New York One Noticias host, and Jennifer Rubin of The Washington Post. And joining me now is Kurt Eichenwald, senior writer at Newsweek, and Yamiche Alcindor, national reporter at The New York Times. Thank you all for being here. Kurt, I've got to start with you. Rather than address the legal controversy about his foundation, Trump defends the Trump Foundation on Twitter and complains about his son being pressured out of doing a fundraiser. Here's the tweet below. My wonderful son, Eric, will no longer be allowed to raise money for children with cancer because of a possible conflict of interest with my presidency. Isn't this a ridiculous shame? He loves these kids, has raised millions of dollars for them, and now must stop. Wrong answer. I mean, the Trump Foundation is a major source of contention. He says he'll resolve it, but the New York State Attorney General says he can't. What is going on here, and how should the media go about reporting on this mixed messaging?
Well, the first thing we need to do is face reality. If Eric Trump is so upset, write a check. You know, we've got to stop acting like everything that happens to this guy when they complain about how difficult it is. If they want to give to charity, give to charity. They can write the money themselves. They don't need to raise it from us. Secondly, and this is the most important, you know, we have a president-elect who has been treated completely differently from anybody else. And, you know, the press has unfortunately gotten into this thing where they're afraid of propaganda outlets like Fox News coming in and calling them biased. There is no bias here. We have got to grow a backbone. We have got to demand press conferences. We have got to stop covering his tweets like they're news. This man has some very serious questions to answer, and we're getting to the point where we should start to wonder, is the problem that he can't answer, that he doesn't have the intelligence to answer, that he's afraid to answer? You know, we have to bear down on him and let the American public know that this is not normal. And when the Foxes of the world object to, you know, acting like a normal reporter as being biased, we should just point them out and say, they're lying. Just ignore them.
In the split screen we had up there a second ago, on either side of you, you had on your left, you've got Yamiche Alcindor, and on your right, you've got Jennifer Rubin, New York Times and Washington Post, respectively. Yamiche, let me come to you. I mean, how likely is it that your editors would come to you and say, you know what? Not going to cover his tweets any longer? I understand the motivation of what Kurt is saying, but how likely is that to happen?
Wishful thinking.
I mean, in my mind, I don't think it's very likely that our editors or myself as a journalist would stop covering Donald Trump's tweets. I think what we want to do and what we will continue to do and what we should do is push past those tweets and demand press conferences, as he said. I think I think it's perfectly feasible that if Donald Trump is tweeting to millions of people and millions of people are then retweeting and everyone's talking about these tweets, that we can't just ignore them and act like they didn't happen, especially when he's talking about things like China and he's talking about things like Israel and he's talking about things like saving jobs. We have to ask, if you're saying saying you're saving jobs, are we going to go and we have to go and not only just say, okay, he said that he saved jobs. We have to go in and say, well, what jobs? What does that mean? How many people? Where are the union workers? I think we have to follow up on these tweets. But I think the tweets are news. I don't think there's no way to deny that.
Well, can I make one thing very clear what I'm saying here? I'm not saying, for example, he came out the other day and said, I saved 5,000 jobs at Sprint. Well, that was a lie. He was talking about the same jobs that had come from SoftBank.
Right.
And those jobs had been announced in October. What happens? We have all these headlines all over the country with with news organizations saying Trump says he saves 5,000 jobs. Well, Kurt, it was a lie, and one that we perpetuated.
Well, Kurt,
if you dig into the stories, ultimately, somewhere, many of them would say this isn't true.
Well, Kurt,
but if you cover the tweets, you got to start off with saying it's a lie.
Let's play the president-elect saying the lie. Let's play it.
I was just called by the head people at Sprint, and they're going to be bringing 5,000 jobs back to the United States. They're taking them from other countries. They're bringing them back to the United States.
Sprint tells us that the 5,000 jobs that you announced today were part of the 50,000
No,
that
Sprint will give you, I just spoke with the head person. He said because of me, they're doing 5,000 jobs in this country.
So, Jennifer, I mean, here you have the president-elect trying to take credit for something that we all know now he shouldn't be taking credit for. How do we, in the press, the Washington Post, the New York Times, Newsweek, New York One, MTV News, how do we, as Yamiche says, push past the tweets, push past the lies to get the truth out to readers?
Right. I think, actually, Kurt's being a little unfair. I think the media did change, and that change came too late in my mind, but during the general election, and that is to use the L word. I grew up in media never using the L word.
Meaning
the
lie.
Exactly. And when it is appropriate, it has to be used. The headline should be Trump lies. The substance of the article should be, this is a lie in a long series of lies, and then the report should go to Sprint and have Sprint explain that this is not an accurate telling. Now, we can do all that, and we should do all that. What we can't do is make people believe it. And this is, I think, sometimes unfair to the media. Simply because we report it doesn't mean it changes people's minds or that they believe what we write. That's a different problem. But I actually think that, look at our colleague, David Fahrenthold. Brilliant reporting on Trump's foundation, which, by the way, has now been shut down. So I'm sure he and others will be courageous in keeping his feet to the fire.
Well, let me bring Jamil and Juan Manuel into this conversation. I know when we were playing the SOT of the, hey, I saved 5,000 jobs, you guys were like, I want to talk about this.
Covering tweets is nothing new. A tweet is a soundbite, right? And for us, and I'm going to save you print reporters from this one, but I think television news has been working with soundbites for a long time, and Donald Trump knows how to play the game, where it's the same thing we've been doing for years and years and years. And then another thing is, like, I'm sure many of your viewers already tuned out because we're talking about demanding press conferences. At the end of the day, us reporters, we care about that because we want to feel that we have something to ask and we want to do our jobs well, right? The normal public, the general public, they don't really care about reporters getting the chance to ask a question. They just... this conversation for them is just like, wow, okay,
right,
they are part of the
baseball.
system, and we are part of the system in a way too, and we have to really talk to ourselves and think about ways of how we're going to consolidate an industry that right now it's another institution that is collapsing and that people don't trust.
Jamil.
I mean, we should also consider the fact that, America, his voters, I shouldn't say America, his voters are putting into office a man who inspired mob intimidation and potential violence against journalists, and who counts Vladimir Putin, who kills journalists, as a role model, in terms of how he thinks he's a very smart guy. I mean, I don't think people really understand how bad this is going to get, and I think that the press is a perfect example of that. I think that, frankly, we need to survive and resist, and that we need to keep telling the truth, since that's what seems to anger him the most.
So if the president-elect, soon-to-be president, doesn't want to do a press conference, maybe he'll sit down with a journalist for a one-on-one. No, sit down with a one-on-one with a journalist. And Hugh Hewitt had a particular person in mind. Let's play that soundbite.
There are some critics out there, like my colleague Joy Reid at MSNBC. Joy's a great professional friend. We don't agree on anything. She'd be a very tough interview, but Donald Trump has never seemed to be afraid of tough interviews. You see him sitting down with people who are considered left of center and audiences which are not normally favorable to conservatives to engage?
Well, that would be everyone in the media except conservative media. I mean, so yes. I mean, look, when we have a press conference, I would qualify that as engaging with left-wing, and that's going to come in January, as he's already talked about.
So I throw it out to the table and the three of you out there on remote. I mean, to Juan Manuel's point, are we in the press getting too worked up and caught up in our own stuff about press conferences and not focusing more on what Yamiche said, and that is to push beyond that to do real tough reporting on this president? Kurt, I'll start with you.
I think that there's one thing that we really have to face here, which is a question. This man is has no public persona prior to this other than a reality TV show. A press conference would demonstrate one way or the other. Does he know what is going on in current events? Does he have a strategy? If we think this is just inside baseball, it's not. A press conference is, in fact, a test of a president's knowledge and intelligence. And if he dodges it, we have to start raising the question, is the problem that he's not capable of handling it?
Right.
Which is a big concern should be a big concern for the United States if we have somebody who's not competent as president of the United States.
Yamiche?
I'll add that as someone who was out on the campaign trail and talking to a lot of Trump supporters, I push back on the idea that Trump supporters don't want answers. I've even had Trump supporters who were very excited about the fact that he's president say, well, he was a wild card, and I really want to know what his policies are, and I really want to know, I trust that he's going to do a good job, but I still don't really know what he's going to do about jobs or about schools or about education or what he's going to replace Obamacare with. There are real questions that even the people who like Donald Trump want answers. So I think when I say push past the tweets, part of that is saying, well, if Sprint's telling us that this was something that happened in October, President-elect Trump, please explain to us why you're taking credit for this. Who in the world called you to tell you that you're the reason why these jobs are staying? I think what we have to ask those questions. Press conferences are usually the way that this happens. We can't tweet questions at him, so I think that he might be able to sit down with a one-on-one.
But he won't answer.
But as someone who works for a paper, I think that a sit-down interview with one TV journalist isn't enough. I think he's going to have to regularly come out and talk to the press. And by the way, I think the press are the people. We are a representation of the American people, and we have to explain that to people. When we say we want press conferences, we want to ask the questions that people on the street want to know.
And we've got less than 2 minutes left. Jamil, then Jennifer, then Juan Manuel.
Yeah, I mean, I think to touch on what Yamiche was saying, I mean, the press reflects what the public is interested in. So the public needs to show the interest in getting these facts, and that interest needs to be reflected sometimes in, clicking on the David Fahrenthold stories instead of, the sort of random fluff that is generated about the new president-elect.
Jennifer?
It's the press's job to hold the president accountable by putting forth the facts to the American people. If he doesn't want to sit for or stand for press conferences, then we should be writing stories questioning whether he is competent to handle press conferences. And then move on. Then do the legwork that journalists do to discover what's going on, what he's saying, whether it's true, whether it's false. And we're going to have to just put on our big boy pants and go after this guy.
Juan Manuel?
I think this election has proven that voters have said to us, you reporters, mainstream media, you don't speak for me, so I don't really care if you get to ask a question to the president-elect or not.
And I would say, just again, Anchor's prerogative here, we have a responsibility as the media to cover the incoming president, but the public has a responsibility to watch the stories that we produce and to click on the stories we spend a whole lot of time writing for them. And that's my editorial comments on that. Jamil Smith and Juan Manuel Benitez will be back. Thank you to Jennifer Rubin, Kurt Eichenwald, and Yamiche Alcindor.